Hi, I'm Taryn. When I was 9 years old, my parents told me I was a curse, and then they left me on a doorstep with a backpack and no goodbye. They never looked back. Not for birthdays, not for graduation. Not even when I built a life from nothing. 21 years later, they showed up again, but not for reconciliation. They came for money. But the truth is, the betrayal didn't start at the doorstep. It started long before, with every quiet dismissal, every rewrite of what actually happened. Why did they come back? Why now? And what do you do when the family that abandoned you wants a piece of the success they never believed you could have? Let me tell you what happened next. I don't remember the exact date. It was sometime in late fall, 2004, but I remember the cold. Not the kind that made you reach for gloves or pull your hoodie tighter. This was different. It crept under my skin and settled into the parts of me I didn't yet know could break. I was sitting on the living room floor, cross-legged, coloring quietly while my parents argued in the kitchen. I'd learned not to make noise when the shouting started, learned to stay invisible. But that morning, their voices were sharper than usual. Every sentence felt aimed, not just thrown. And then I heard my name. "She's a curse, Arliss," my mother snapped. "Ever since she was born, everything's gone to hell." "She was never supposed to be here," he shot back. "We were doing fine before. I lost my job 2 months after she came. Then we lost the baby. It's like she brought it all down." I froze. I wasn't supposed to hear that. I don't think they cared if I did. The walls in that house didn't keep much out, especially not words like curse, bad luck, or mistake. I didn't even understand all of it then. I was just 9, but something in my chest tightened like a warning bell going off. That afternoon, my mom called me into the hallway. She didn't yell, she didn't cry. She just said, "Go pack a bag." I thought maybe we were visiting someone. Maybe it was a sleepover. I asked, "For how long?" She didn't answer. I packed my favorite jeans, a hoodie that was too big for me, and a small stuffed rabbit named Penny. I tucked Penny deep into the corner of my backpack like I was ashamed to bring her along. We didn't talk during the drive. I kept my eyes on the passenger window, watching leaves whip by in the wind. I counted the seconds between turns, trying to guess where we were going. But when she pulled up in front of my grandparents' house, my stomach dropped. She didn't park, just stopped. The engine still running. "Get out," she said, not looking at me. I stared at her for a second, waiting for her to laugh, to say it was a joke, to tell me to hop back in. But she didn't, so I grabbed my bag and stepped out. The door closed behind me, like a sentence being punctuated. I stood there on the front step, staring at the door I'd visited 100 times before, but never like this. I rang the bell, waited. My grandfather cracked it open, squinting like he hadn't expected me. His voice was tired. "Taryn, what are you doing here?" I tried to speak, but nothing came out. My mom's car was already pulling away. He sighed, stepped outside, and looked down the street. We can't go against your parents, honey." He left the door open just long enough to hand me a blanket. Then he closed it, gently, but firmly. I didn't cry right away. I didn't scream. I just stood there with the blanket around my shoulders, watching the wind pick up stray leaves and carry them down the sidewalk. I waited for someone to come back. But no one did. Hours passed. The sun dipped behind the rooftops. The air got sharper. My fingers started to burn from the cold, even through the blanket. That's when I heard a voice, soft, confused, familiar. "Taryn?" It was Mrs. Lenora, the neighbor from across the street. I hadn't seen her in months. She rushed over, took one look at me, and ushered me inside her home without asking any questions. Her house smelled like cinnamon and old books. She made me tea I didn't drink and called someone. I think Child Protective Services. But she didn't let them come that night. Said I'd been through enough for one day. She gave me one of her husband's old sweaters, far too big, sleeves hanging past my fingertips. She sat on the edge of the couch while I curled into a corner, finally allowing my eyes to blur. That was the first time I felt warmth that day. She didn't say much, just stayed nearby, refilling my tea, even though I never touched it. She asked if I wanted to call anyone. I shook my head. I think she knew. I fell asleep staring out her window, looking at the house I used to call home, now dark and indifferent. I waited to see if a light would come on, if maybe someone would notice what they'd done. But all I saw was stillness. That night, something shifted inside me. Not like a snap, more like a slow, quiet unhooking. The part of me that thought I belonged somewhere let go. I was only 9, but I knew what abandonment looked like. I knew what it sounded like, too. It was the click of a car door, the hum of an engine driving away, and the silence that followed when you realized no one was coming back. I never forgot the sound of that door closing, because for years, every success I had felt like knocking on a door that would never open again. I told myself it didn't matter, that I'd stop caring. But the truth is, when you grow up erased, every win feels like a question. If they didn't see me, did I really exist? By the time I turned 10, the silence had a weight. It followed me from room to room at Lenora's house and clung to me in the back rows of every classroom. I was still the same girl who brought home A's and asked permission before speaking, but now I sat alone. My name still made the announcements, spelling bee finalist, poetry contest winner, but no one clapped from the audience when it was called. Everyone else had someone waiting in the wings. I had a chair left empty every time. At first, the teachers would look around expectantly, waiting for a hand to go up. A parent, grandparent, even a distant cousin. But after the first few times, they stopped asking. The empty chair was no longer an accident. It became mine. I kept trying, though. That's the part I wish I could explain to people who only see the polished version of my life now. I didn't stop loving them just because they stopped showing up. I kept drawing cards, writing little notes, every holiday, every birthday, even some Sundays when I missed them more than usual. I would scribble out a message and slide it into an envelope. "Hi, Mom. I hope you're okay. I'm doing well in school. I miss you." I would place them in the small blue box near the door, the one Lenora used for outgoing mail. I never asked her to check the stamps. I think a part of me believed the act of writing was enough, that maybe they'd feel it, somehow. One afternoon, after I'd slipped a card in like usual, Lenora pulled me aside. She didn't look angry or sad, just honest. "Sweetheart," she said softly, holding a stack of returned envelopes in one hand. "These have all come back, marked Return to Sender." She handed them to me gently. The handwriting on the front was mine. My name, their address, the same on every envelope. She added quietly, "They don't live there anymore, haven't for a while." I stared at the stack, familiar shapes, my childish cursive. Some envelopes were worn, the ink smeared from the cold or rain. One still had a tiny glitter sticker in the corner. I didn't cry that day. That part surprised me too. I just nodded and took them back. That night, I lined them up on the floor of my room. They looked like little soldiers who had marched out and come home wounded. That was when I stopped writing, not out of anger, but from understanding. The kind that doesn't need to scream to feel final. Lenora, being who she was, never told me they're not worth it, or you'll forget them one day. Instead, she gave me a sentence that lived with me. Some people break what they can't control. And she was right. I began to let go, little by little. Not dramatically, not with tantrums or slammed doors, but in the small, invisible ways that only children learn. I stopped raising my hand when volunteers were called. I avoided the principal's Student of the Month assemblies. I asked to be seated in the back, closer to the exit. When I won the regional spelling bee at 11, I barely smiled. They handed me the ribbon and a framed certificate. A photographer asked, "Can we get a shot of you with your parents?" I blinked and nodded toward the space beside me. They couldn't make it. The photographer hesitated, looked toward Lenora, who was standing a little farther back. I shook my head gently. He snapped the picture anyway. Just me, alone. My smile was practiced by then. That was the last public event I ever agreed to attend for school. From that point forward, I told my teachers I preferred working behind the scenes. I joined the yearbook committee, not for the friends. There were few, but because I could be useful without being seen. There was one more card I wrote, though. I didn't send it. I wrote it on a rainy evening, right after an academic award came in the mail. No ceremony this time, just a letter sealed in a manila envelope. I sat down with a marker and wrote on a piece of thick cardstock. I got another one. You still didn't come, but I stopped expecting you to. I folded it in half, sealed it in an envelope, and addressed it like the others. I walked it all the way to the mailbox on the corner and stood there. Instead of dropping it in, I opened the envelope, tore the card in half, then in half again. I dropped the pieces into the trash bin by the curb and whispered, "I get it now." It wasn't a big moment. There was no lightning strike, no thunderous epiphany, but something loosened in me. Something heavy started to lift, not all at once, but enough to make room for air again. I told myself it didn't matter, that I'd stop caring. But the truth is, when you grow up erased, every win feels like a question. If they didn't see me, did I really exist? They may have erased me from their story, but I was about to write a whole new one of my own. It started in the middle of an ordinary summer afternoon. Lenora was clearing out the tall wooden cabinet in her kitchen, the one that had swallowed bills, recipes, coupons, and God knows what since the 80s. She called me in to help, and I didn't think twice. We sorted papers into neat stacks, trash, keep, and who knows yet. I remember the fan humming in the background, the scent of floor polish mixing with the faint sweetness of the lemon cookies cooling on the counter. Somewhere between old insurance records and yellowed newspaper clippings, I pulled out a thick manila envelope with my name handwritten across the front. Not to Taryn, not with love, just my name, like a label, not a message. I opened it without a word. Inside were 3 folded bank statements and a short note written in my grandmother's looping cursive. I recognized it from birthday cards she used to send before she passed. It read, "This is yours. I set it aside when you were born. You deserved something of your own." My heart caught mid-beat. The first bank statement was dated the year I was born. A savings account in my name started with $500. Over time, it had grown to just over $12,000. Not much in the big picture of the world, but to a 15-year-old girl with nothing to her name, it might as well have been $1 million. I flipped to the last page. Balance, 0.00. Withdrawal date, 2 weeks after I was kicked out. Lenora must have seen my face drain of color. She didn't say anything, just came over, sat beside me, and placed a hand on my back. I didn't ask if she already knew. Somehow I could tell she didn't. We pored over the documents together. 2 withdrawal slips, both signed. Names I'd seen on school registration forms and doctor's office files. My parents. They didn't just kick me out, they cleaned me out. Quietly, legally, completely. I stared at the ink like it might smear under my gaze and change meaning. But the truth stared back at me in print. "So," I said quietly, "even the money meant to protect me wasn't safe." Lenora didn't offer pity. She gave me space. And maybe that was kinder. Later that evening, I pulled out the small box of childhood things Lenora had kept for me. Doodles, class photos, a broken friendship bracelet, the works. Near the bottom was a crumpled, half-torn sheet of construction paper with faded crayon lines. I remembered it instantly. A house, a sun, stick figures holding hands. Me, Mom, Dad, and a dog we never had. I'd drawn it the night before I was told to pack a bag. I'd shown it to my mom that morning, all proud and excited. She'd taken one look, muttered, "No more of this nonsense. That's not our reality," and ripped it down the middle. I had forgotten that part. Or maybe I had just chosen not to remember. Lenora must have found the pieces and quietly saved them, taping them together like stitches on a wound no one knew how to clean. It didn't hurt the same way it used to. Not sharp, just deep, familiar. I didn't cry that night. Not even when I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, tracing cracks in the paint with my eyes. But for the first time in years, I felt something shift inside me. Not grief, not fear. Rage. Steady, quiet rage. Not the kind that burns everything down, but the kind that builds something better just to prove it can be done. The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table before the sun was fully up. Lenora was still asleep. I pulled out a fresh sheet of paper and sketched the old drawing again. Same house, same stick figure me. But this time, there were only two figures. Me and Lenora. No sun, no pretend dog. Just us. Underneath, I wrote in capital letters, "Start here." I pinned it to the corkboard above my desk. Not because I needed a reminder, but because I needed a beginning. That afternoon, I walked 3 blocks to a local cafe and asked for an application. I didn't even know if they were hiring. The woman behind the counter said, "You're a little young, but you look like you mean business." I nodded. "I do." She handed me the form. As I walked home, warm breeze brushing past my face, I realized something. They took my name off their list, but I was writing it back into the world, 1 page at a time. From that night forward, I stopped waiting for stages they'd never let me stand on, and built my own. But before that resolve hardened, I had to feel it break again. My graduation envelope came 2 weeks before the ceremony. It was thin, no gold foil, no embossing, just my name and address, typed. Inside was a schedule in a small note that read, "Formal attire encouraged. Reception to follow." I read it 3 times. Nowhere did it mention me by name. No congratulations, no honor cord notice, nothing personal at all. I was top 3 in the class, but you wouldn't know that by reading the invite. Just a line, "Honorees will be announced during the program." 2 days later, Mrs. Caldwell, my English teacher, pulled me aside as I handed in my final paper. "There were some adjustments," she said, glancing at her shoes. "Just be present, Taryn. That's what matters." Adjustments. The word echoed. It didn't say who made them, but I knew. I didn't have parents to clap. No school donations made in my name. No family presents to photograph. Whatever list I'd once been on had been trimmed for convenience. The day of the ceremony, the Cedar Rapids Community Center was draped in maroon and silver streamers. Folding chairs lined up in rows, flowers at every corner. A welcome table displayed programs in neat stacks. I scanned the list on the inside cover. Names under future leaders. Names under most promising scholars. Names under top achievers. Mine wasn't there. Lenora walked in beside me, her arm linked through mine, dressed in her Sunday best. She smiled politely at the greeter, but I could feel her grip tighten as she scanned the same program. We were directed toward the back, past rows of beaming families, proud moms with camcorders, dads in pressed shirts. At the very back corner of the room was a table labeled overflow seating. There were no flowers, no tablecloth, just 4 metal chairs and a paper sign. A staff member gestured toward it. "We thought you'd prefer a quieter seat." Lenora didn't respond. She just sat down slowly, like she didn't trust the chair not to give out. The lights dimmed. A slideshow of baby photos and student memories played on a screen. One of the girls in my chemistry class sobbed when her baby picture showed up. Another's dad whistled when her award slide appeared. My name never came up. When they began calling students on stage, I kept my expression neutral, polite, practice. I clapped where it was expected, smiled at the right faces, nodded when someone looked my way. My name was skipped, not mispronounced, not fumbled, skipped. When they began the closing remarks, I stood quietly and walked out. I didn't make a scene. I didn't slam anything or raise my voice. I just left. The hallway outside the event room echoed with each step I took. I paused near the exit, the one they'd pointed me toward when we first arrived. I glanced back once, not for them, but for me. To remember what it felt like to be erased so politely, it almost looked like a favor. That night, after dinner, Lenora slid a letter across the table. It was addressed to the school superintendent, the principal, and the guidance office. "I already sent copies," she said. "That one's yours to keep." It was firm, unemotional, just facts. She didn't ask if I wanted a response from them. I think we both knew it wouldn't matter. They called 2 days later, offered a private recognition meeting. I declined. In my room, taped to the back of my closet door, was a folded piece of paper I hadn't looked at in weeks. It was my speech, the one I'd written the month before, back when I thought my name would be called. I unfolded it. It started hopeful, cheesy even, typical senior speech stuff. But the last line hit differently now. I whispered it aloud, alone in the quiet. "I may not be your top student tonight, but I'll be the name you never forget." I folded it back up and tucked it into the inside pocket of my jacket. From that night forward, I stopped waiting for stages they'd never let me stand on, and built my own. I thought they might stay gone forever, until someone told them how far I'd come. After the graduation ceremony that never called my name, I needed to disappear. Not physically, but emotionally. I needed to become someone who didn't care anymore, someone who created her own definition of worth. That summer, I didn't go on trips or join farewell parties. I stayed in Lenora's apartment, mostly in the back room that we called the office, even though it barely fit a desk and a cracked bookshelf. It was where she kept bills and paperbacks with broken spines. It became where I kept everything I didn't know how to say out loud. I pulled out the taped-together drawing again, the one from years ago, the one I'd redrawn after finding the torn original. I laid it flat and stared at it, eyes landing on the tiny version of myself, standing near a crooked house and a sky that had no sun. This time, I sketched a new version. The same little girl, but she was walking toward an open door. No one stood inside. No one waited. It didn't matter. The door was open. That was enough. That sketch became more than a drawing. It became the seed of something, a logo, a name, a quiet rebellion. Open Vest. It started as an idea, a digital resource board for kids like me. Kids who didn't have a family to cheer for them. Kids who didn't know how to apply for college or ask for help without choking on the shame. I didn't know how to build it yet, but I knew it needed to exist. I spent most days at the Cedar Rapids Public Library. They had free Wi-Fi, free workshops, and librarians who didn't ask why you were there so much. I signed up for every coding class, every webinar on digital design, every seminar that offered coffee and a PowerPoint. At night, I scrubbed floors at a 24-hour gym and worked the breakfast shift at a nearby diner. My clothes always smelled like lemon cleaner or bacon grease, but I didn't care. I was building something no one could take away. When people asked where I came from, I said, "I live with my guardian." I didn't mention my parents. I didn't say I used to have a savings account they emptied. I didn't tell them about the chair left open at my graduation. I wanted to be known for what I built, not what I survived. After a few months, OpenVest had a landing page, a mission statement, and 3 resource guides I wrote myself. I shared it in a foster care forum under a throwaway account. I didn't expect anything to come of it, but someone commented, "This is exactly what I needed 2 years ago." And that was all it took. I started adding content every week. Career tools, scholarships, how to rent an apartment without a cosigner, how to file taxes when no one ever taught you how. I didn't advertise, I just kept going. One day, a tech blogger from Chicago found the site and asked to feature me in a Young Innovators segment. I almost said no, but Lenora insisted, "Sometimes the people who hide deserve the most light." The article came out on a Thursday. 2 weeks later, a national digital magazine picked it up. I was sitting at the library when the email hit my inbox. I clicked the link, and there it was. My name, my face, a headline in bold. "The founder who made herself from nothing." I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I stared at it for a long time, then closed the browser. At home that night, I left my phone face up on the counter. I kept glancing at it, not hoping for anything specific, just curious. No texts from my parents. No emails from old teachers. No congratulations from any relative who used to pinch my cheeks and call me the quiet one. Just silence. Over tea, Lenora said gently, "You weren't made to be clapped for by them." I looked at her and smiled, not out of sadness, but peace. "That's okay," I replied. "I'm not building applause. I'm building something that outlives it." But not everyone stayed silent. Someone else, someone unexpected, reached out next. The thing about living in the same town you were cast out of is that you're always walking a thin line between the past and the present. Most days, I managed to balance. That morning at St. Luke's Hospital, though, I slipped. Lenora had fallen on the front porch 2 nights before. Nothing dramatic, just a bad twist of the ankle that refused to heal right. We were in the ER by 8 a.m., checked in and waiting for imaging. I filled out her forms while she smiled through the pain, pretending she wasn't nearly 80 and stubborn as ever. They took her back for x-rays, and I stayed in the waiting area, half scrolling my phone, half listening to the low murmur of others around me. It smelled like antiseptic and old coffee. The walls were beige, the lighting unforgiving. Standard hospital ambiance. That's when I heard it. A voice that dropped my stomach faster than any diagnosis ever could. "I know, sweetheart, I'm right here." I froze. There, across the hallway, was my mother. Standing in front of an exam room, her hand on the shoulder of a young woman who looked like she could be her niece or a neighbor's kid. Comforting. Present. Tender in a way I had never received. She looked up mid-sentence, and her eyes locked on mine. It lasted less than a second. Recognition, then retreat. She blinked, looked away, and carried on like I was a stranger in an airport, like I hadn't been her daughter, like I didn't exist. She walked past me not 10 minutes later. Didn't flinch. No smile, no nod. Nothing. I didn't move either. Not because I was stunned. Not because I didn't know what to say. Because deep down, the child inside me still hoped for a flicker of something. A Taryn? A pause. An apology. Something human. It never came. Lenora returned shortly after, wrapped in an ace bandage and wheeled out by a nurse who smelled like menthol and had kind eyes. We didn't talk much on the ride home. She must have sensed the shift in me, like something had torn quietly and left no blood, but all the ache. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed with a journal I hadn't opened in years. The cover was soft, worn from moves, and summers pressed beneath other books. I wrote with a pen that scratched like truth. "You taught me how to survive abandonment. Tonight, you reminded me that I can outgrow the need for closure." The next few days passed in a kind of fog. I kept up with work, took Lenora to follow-up appointments, and pretended everything was status quo. But I kept checking my phone. I wasn't expecting anything from her. But maybe from someone else? 3 days later, it came. A text. "Hey, I saw you at the hospital. I didn't know what to say. I'm sorry, I'm glad you're okay. Elizabeth, my sister. We hadn't spoken since I left home. She had been 15 then, just a teenager following the rules, trying not to rock the boat. I never blamed her for staying silent, but that silence had stretched into years. And now, a text. Tiny black letters on a pale screen. No punctuation after sorry, no elaboration. I read it 12 times before I replied. "Thanks, me too." That was it. I didn't ask how she was, didn't send a photo or say we should meet. Just left it floating in the ether, the same way she'd left me, years ago. Some might say that was cold, but it wasn't revenge, it was boundary. I'd spent so long wanting closure, thinking it came in the form of an apology or a reunion or someone sobbing in the rain. But what I'd learned was this. Sometimes closure doesn't come. Sometimes you create it. By not answering. By not explaining. By not needing their recognition to prove your existence. Later that week, I watched the mail arrive from the kitchen window. Bills, flyers, A birthday card for Lenora from her dentist. I stood there holding the stack and realized how much had changed, not just in my life, but in me. Their absence used to hollow me out. Now, it just made room for other things. I thought about the way my mother looked through me, the way Elizabeth texted from behind a wall she wasn't ready to climb. I thought about how many times I'd bent over backward, hoping someone would pick me just once, choose me over convenience. They hadn't, and I was still here. The silence wasn't sharp anymore, it was structure. And just when I thought they'd reached their boldest, they tried to take what I built. It was a Tuesday, late November. I had just wrapped a virtual meeting with my development team, clicked leave, and leaned back in my chair. The light from the window behind me cast a quiet glare across my desk, highlighting the stack of unopened mail I had ignored for most of the week. One envelope stood out, cream-colored, stiff, and handwritten in a familiar cursive that turned my stomach. Cedar Rapids postmark, no return address. But I knew. Of course I knew. I opened it without ceremony. Inside, neatly typed and branded with a law firm's letterhead, was a formal request for educational support. The language was polished, clinical, but every word screamed entitlement. My parents, through legal counsel, were asking me to help pay for my younger brother's college tuition. They framed it as an act of familial continuity and cited, in exact words, the years they raised and supported me as justification. I didn't move, didn't blink, just sat there staring at the letter like it might dissolve if I waited long enough. They hadn't spoken to me in over a decade, not after the court hearing, not after the articles, not after I built something from the ashes they left. And now they wanted money. But it wasn't the money that got me, it was the rewrite. The years they raised and supported me. As if those years hadn't ended with a backpack on a doorstep and a closed door behind me. My hands trembled for a second before I folded the letter neatly and placed it flat on the desk. I wasn't about to let them break my breath, not again. The next morning, while reviewing platform data with my lead engineer, my phone buzzed with a new email notification. The sender was one I hadn't seen in years. GordonPMidwestConsult.org. Uncle Gordon. Subject: Family Duty. I didn't open it at first, but curiosity has a way of getting its claws in, and by the time I read the first line, I knew this wasn't just a financial ask. It was a moral ambush. Taryn, we all do things we don't want to for the sake of family. Blood matters. You were given a chance. It's your turn to give back. No, hello. No, how are you? Just expectation. His words weren't sharp. They didn't need to be. The venom was in the assumption that I still belonged to them, that I still owed something, that my silence meant access. I didn't scream, I didn't reply. Instead, I printed the attorney's letter and Gordon's email. I placed them side by side, attached a yellow sticky note, and wrote in bold, steady letters. My silence is not an agreement. It's an upgrade. I stuck both pages in a manila folder, dropped it into my filing cabinet, and locked the drawer. That night, I sat on my balcony with a cup of tea and the lights of downtown Austin glowing quietly below. I thought about everything I'd built, not just the platform, not just the name, but the life that came after the silence. The team I had hired, the resources we'd distributed, the kids who wrote to say, "You helped me get my first apartment," or, "I didn't think college was possible until now." And still, somehow, I was reduced to a line item in a letter, a walking bank account with a pulse. That's what made it sting, not the money, but the fact that they hadn't just forgotten me, they had repurposed me. The next morning, I called my lawyer. "This is probably nothing," I said, "but I want it on record." She didn't even ask why, just told me to send everything over. Later, I sat with my journal, the one I only used when I needed to process things too real for a Google Doc or a Notes app. I wasn't just erased, I wrote. I was repurposed, as a bank account. Silence is powerful. But now, they were about to hear what it sounds like when the world speaks for me. The meeting room on the top floor of my office was glass-walled, Minimalist, always spotless. I sat at the end of the table, watching sunlight creep across the concrete floor as the projector booted up. My legal team sat across from me, folders spread like a war map. We had done this before, but never quite like this. "They've sent another follow-up," Ava, my assistant, said, sliding a letter toward me. "Deadline's on it this time. Implied consequences." I opened it and scanned the legal language. Same tone, same demands. Dressed up in phrases like amicable resolution and fair contribution. They still thought they could intimidate me into writing a check. I reached for the black folder beside me. The label was handwritten in block letters. The day they called me a curse. "I'm ready," I said. What they didn't know, couldn't have known, was that just 2 weeks earlier, a box arrived at my front door. No return label, just a scribbled note that said, "Found this in the garage. Thought it might be yours." Inside was a dusty VHS tape, wrapped in a plastic grocery bag from a long-defunct supermarket. I borrowed a converter from the tech guy downstairs and digitized the footage. What played left me sitting in stunned silence. It was me, 9 years old, a little girl on a porch, clutching a backpack that looked too heavy for her size. The timestamp in the corner read April 3rd, 2004. You could hear my father's voice clearly. "You don't live here anymore." The screen shook as the person filming, a neighbor, I later confirmed, shifted. Then came the unmistakable sound of a car door slamming and tires crunching gravel as they pulled away. I didn't cry in the footage. I just stood there, blinking like I didn't understand the rules of the world anymore. I had forgotten that someone might have seen it, that someone might have cared enough to record it. And now, nearly 21 years later, it was back. I combined it with what we had. Bank records showing they drained my savings. The rejection letters from school events. The lawyer's requests. The family's guilt-ridden emails. When my journalist friend, Rachel, arrived later that week, I played the tape without warning. She didn't say anything for a full minute after it ended. Then, "You want to go public?" "No," I said. "I want them to see that I'm not afraid of silence anymore." We recorded my statement in one take. No edits. No dramatic lighting or music. Just me, sitting in my office, looking directly into the lens. "This isn't revenge," I said calmly. "This is record-keeping. For every child who was told they were the problem, for every kid who wasn't believed." I posted the clip on my company's social media accounts with a short caption. "If you want to know who I am, look here. If you want to know why I fought, listen." Within 24 hours, it had over 3 million views. By the third day, it hit national press. The comments didn't come from pity. They came from solidarity. Other people who had been disowned, shamed, forgotten. Then came the email from my parents' lawyer. "We are open to resolving this matter privately, in the interest of preserving family dignity." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. That folder, the day they called me a curse, stayed on my desk for weeks. I never opened it again, but I never filed it away either. It was my line in the sand. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same voice that once said, "You don't live here anymore," now wanted to negotiate as if nothing had happened. As if they could scrub the years clean. But the world had already seen it, and I had nothing left to prove. They took my seat once. This time, I gave it back, before they could even ask for more. The envelope arrived in the mail on a Wednesday, cream-colored and thick, sealed in gold foil like something regal. I almost didn't open it, but curiosity is a persistent thing. It was an invitation to my younger brother's birthday celebration. A banquet, formal attire suggested. Venue, a high-end event hall in Cedar Rapids I remembered from years ago. The invitation was signed, in full script. "With love, Darlene." No personal note, no acknowledgement that we hadn't spoken in nearly a decade. Just an ornate font telling me to come celebrate family. I held the card in my hands for a while before sliding it onto my desk. It wasn't guilt that pulled me to say yes. It wasn't forgiveness either. It was strategy. Sometimes you walk into a fire, Not because you want to burn, but because you want them to know you've already walked through worse. The evening of the party, I arrived 10 minutes before the start time. I wore a navy blue suit, not a dress. Sharp lines. No apologies. My heels clicked across the polished floors as I handed my invitation to the woman at the check-in table. She gave me a stiff smile and gestured to the far end of the hall. "We have you at the overflow table," she said, like it was a seating preference I had requested. My table sat next to the emergency exit. No linens, no centerpiece. A single folded card with overflow printed in black ink. As if the word didn't carry enough meaning already. Around me, clusters of family and friends filled round tables draped in gold. Laughter echoed from corners of the room I hadn't seen in years. Some familiar faces glanced in my direction, paused, then turned away. I sat down and poured myself water. Not because I was thirsty, but because it gave me something to hold. An hour in, my father stepped up to the microphone. He tapped the side of his glass with a spoon and cleared his throat. "Thank you all for being here tonight," he said, "to celebrate our son, and to honor the people who stood by our family all these years." There was applause. I didn't clap. No mention of me. No acknowledgement that I was in the room. I wasn't surprised. In fact, I had expected it. But the confirmation settled like lead in my chest. I lifted my glass in a quiet toast. To myself. My phone buzzed quietly under the table. A text from Rachel, my journalist friend from Austin. "Local paper says someone in your family leaked your Forbes feature last month. New article runs Monday. They wanted you seen." I stared at the message. So that was it. The invitation. The table. The timing. I wasn't here to reconcile. I was here to validate their narrative. The estranged daughter made good. A trophy they didn't earn. "They want you visible again," Rachel had written, but only on their terms. I stood up before the dessert trays rolled out. No one stopped me. No one looked my way. Before I left, I took the folded overflow card and scribbled something on the back with the pen I kept in my bag. "Thanks for the reminder. This table was never mine." I placed it neatly on the white plate, walked past the dance floor, and out through the front doors. The night was warm for Iowa, the kind of warmth that made you feel like summer was trying to return. Each step I took away from that building felt like the undoing of a string I'd been wrapped in for years. They wanted a photo opportunity. They got a silhouette walking away. I thought that would be the final page, until someone reminded me that not all family comes in through the front door. The letter from their lawyer came with an offer for private mediation. The phrase sounded more like damage control than an actual compromise. My attorney, Denise, advised me not to go. "They're testing your boundary. If you sit down, they'll claim you've already agreed to soften it." But I had my own reasons. I told her we'd go. I brought her with me, of course. And I wore a wire. The conference room they chose was downtown, small and stiff, with a tray of untouched pastries and a pitcher of lukewarm water no one poured. My parents arrived looking like churchgoers, calm, practiced, modestly dressed in a way that said, "We're just here to be reasonable." They opened with pleasantries. My mother commented on my shoes. My father said something about the weather in Austin. I sat in silence, letting their small talk stretch itself thin. Then the tone changed. "We just thought," my mother said, clasping her hands, "that with all you've accomplished, it wouldn't be difficult for you to help with his college. It's family, after all." My father added, "We did raise you, maybe not perfectly, but we provided a foundation." I let the silence hang in the room like smoke. "Which part?" I asked. "The foundation. Was it when you locked the front door behind me? Or when you told everyone I'd run off and ruined the family's peace?" They both flinched, not from my voice, which was calm, but from the mirror I held up to them. My father shifted in his seat. "You're successful now. You wouldn't be who you are if we hadn't made hard choices." That was the moment the cracks formed, not in them, but in the narrative they had built. Denise took notes silently, eyes sharp behind her glasses. She didn't need to speak. The tape was rolling, Every sentence, every shift in tone, every carefully reworded lie. It was all documented. 3 weeks later, we filed a motion in court, proactive. Not just to block their request, but to draw a clean, permanent legal boundary. We cited emotional abuse, financial misconduct, and abandonment. No dramatics, just truth. They countered with a flimsy plea: family obligation, moral responsibility, a daughter's role. The courtroom was small, mostly empty. No media, no grandstanding. Just a judge who read through both filings with the expression of someone trying to stay patient through a rerun. He looked up once, halfway through their attorney's closing. "There's no legal or ethical basis for financial compensation here," he said. "She owes you nothing." My mother gasped quietly. My father stared at the floor. I didn't move. Denise gave me a quick nod. Calm, certain. We stood, gathered our things, and made for the exit. Just before we reached the doors, my mother's voice cracked through the stillness. "You'll regret this one day." I didn't look back. I didn't answer. Outside, reporters were waiting, a few who had picked up whispers after the earlier online post. I said nothing. Just walked down the courthouse steps, holding the signed ruling in one hand, my bag in the other. That night, back at my apartment, I sat on the floor in front of the fireplace. I placed the original demand letter on a ceramic dish and lit a match. The paper curled quickly, flames licking the edges like it was eager to disappear. I watched it burn to ash, then whispered, "I didn't win. I just ended the part where they could rewrite the story." Later, I closed my journal with one final line. "They taught me how to fight. I just learned how to win differently." And just when I thought my story had turned quiet, the past whispered one more time, from someone I never expected. It was a Friday afternoon, Austin's sun softening across the buildings as I walked out of my office. We'd just finished a quarterly board meeting, one of those sessions where the language is all numbers and strategy, but the mood lingers long after in your chest. I was tired, but satisfied, the kind of tired that comes from building something no one can take from you. I stepped into the parking lot and stopped. There, near the row of cars, stood my mother, Darlene. She wasn't leaning against a car or pacing. She stood with her purse clutched tightly, like she didn't know what to do with her hands. No warning, no text. Just there. I didn't say anything. Neither did she, not at first. She took one tentative step forward and opened with, "We didn't come here to argue." "We?" That's when I noticed him. My father, a few steps behind, arms crossed like a bodyguard who didn't want to be seen. He kept his distance. My mother looked older than I remembered, but softer too. Her voice cracked slightly as she added, "You'll always be my daughter, no matter what." And then she stepped in, arms beginning to lift. I raised a hand, not forcefully, just enough, and stepped back. She froze. The air between us suddenly thick with a kind of tension only shared blood can summon. Her arms slowly dropped. "You don't have to be afraid," she said. But I wasn't. I just didn't want it. I stood still as she fumbled to keep the moment alive. She started talking about how families drift, how pride gets in the way. She referenced God. She referenced grace. She mentioned how proud they were of me, how they kept up with my progress. But it was like watching someone try to sell a house they abandoned years ago, expecting you to forget the broken windows because they planted flowers on the porch. I listened. I didn't speak. That silence, my silence, it became something larger than either of us, a boundary shaped not by walls, but by everything that had come before. She shifted tactics. "You think this success means you don't need a family?" she asked, trying to sound hurt, but her tone slid sideways into accusation. That's when I finally answered. "This success means I finally understand what family actually is, and what it isn't." She blinked. My father took one small step forward, but said nothing. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I simply added, "Thank you for coming by. You're free to go now." I turned and walked back toward the building, Heels steady on the concrete, keycard already in hand. I didn't turn around. That evening, I sat in my apartment with the lights low and a cup of mint tea slowly losing steam. I didn't feel powerful. I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt clear. That hug? It wasn't meant for me. It was for her conscience, her image, her illusion of mending something she refused to admit she broke. But I didn't need it anymore. Closure hadn't come when they apologized. It came when I didn't need one anymore. And this time, I wasn't standing on a doorstep hoping for love. I was holding the key to my own home and opening the door for someone else. It started with a message. Short, jarring in its familiarity. Hope you're doing well. My sister says her baby's been bringing bad luck. She called him a curse. Thought of you. Can we talk? It was from Naomi, a second cousin I hadn't seen since childhood. We weren't close. Distant holidays, shared relatives, that was it. But the word curse lit something in me I hadn't felt in years. Not anger, not grief. Urgency. We met at a small cafe outside of Austin. Naomi looked exhausted, young, overwhelmed, like she was holding guilt in both hands and didn't know where to set it down. She said it after he got sick, twice. Then the job stuff. Now my dad's car broke down. She thinks it's the baby. I told her that's insane, but I don't know, she believes it. I listened. I didn't jump to blame. I didn't throw stones. I just said one thing. The moment you name a child a burden, you break them before life even gets a chance to test them. She blinked, then nodded. We talked for hours. I told her about myself. Not everything, but enough. I saw the shift in her shoulders by the time we hugged goodbye. It wasn't a solution, but it was a seed. Sometimes that's more than enough. Back at home, I walked through the guest room, or what had been the guest room. Lenora's room now. Her furniture had been delivered the week before. She hadn't agreed to move in until recently, and even then, she called it a long visit. But I knew better. She had left her gardening books on the nightstand and her slippers under the bed. On the wall above her dresser hung a framed drawing. My drawing! The one I'd created at 9, recreated again at 15. Torn, taped, then redrawn. Finally finished. It showed a little girl walking toward an open door. Just her. Just light. No shadows. That frame wasn't just art, it was survival. That weekend, we drove to a cabin just outside of Fredericksburg. Quiet. Lake view. No reception. I brought a stack of journals and a pen that always bled a little too much ink. Lenora brought crossword puzzles and a kettle that squeaked on the stove. We didn't say much. In the mornings, I wrote by the water. Not about pain. About what came after. I thought I needed a mother, I scribbled once. What I needed was a place to be loved without proof. There was no press at that cabin, no internet, no platforms. Just breath and quiet, and a kind of peace I hadn't known I'd been chasing. On our last night there, I sat by the fire and reviewed my talk for an upcoming Youth Foundation gala. I had agreed to speak, not because I liked attention, but because I knew what it felt like to be 15 and invisible. I practiced the opening line out loud, fire crackling beside me. I was never the curse. I was the chapter no one wanted to read, but I'm writing the ending now. The next week, I stood on stage in front of rows of young people, most of them foster kids, first-gen college students, quiet kids who had lived too much too early. I looked them in the eye and said, "Family isn't blood. It's the people who walk in when others write you out." Somewhere in the audience, I knew Naomi was sitting with her baby in her lap. After the event, I drove home in silence. I pulled into the driveway, headlights sweeping across the garden Lenora had started from scratch. I stepped into the house, my house, and dropped my keys in the bowl by the door. And this time, I wasn't standing on a doorstep hoping for love. I was holding the key to my own home and opening the door for someone else. I used to believe survival meant staying quiet, shrinking myself, carrying pain like it was proof of strength. But life has taught me that real strength comes from naming the truth out loud and choosing who gets to stay in your life. You don't owe anyone access just because you share DNA. Family, as I've learned, is not who gave you your name. It's who says it with respect. If you've ever been made to feel like you didn't belong, like you had to earn love or prove your worth just to be accepted, I want you to hear this. You are already enough. Your story matters, even if the people you hoped would listen never do. Your voice is valid, your boundaries are sacred, and your future is yours to reclaim. Now I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever had to walk away from a version of family to protect your peace? Do you believe forgiveness requires reconnection, or can it live quietly in your own growth? If this story touched something in you, let me know by dropping a comment with the number 1, or tell me where you're watching from. If you disagreed or saw things differently, I still want to hear your side. Your experience matters too. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, real, raw, and rooted in resilience, go ahead and subscribe to this channel so you never miss what's next. Thank you for being here.